and welcome to the channel. I haven't posted in a while because I've been working on a couple of projects and this video is about one of them. Now, a little while ago I decided to give taking wildlife photos with film a go. Now, it's not my first rodeo, as I've been a photographer since the early 1980s and I've shot a lot of film, just not on wildlife. The parameters that I set for myself with this project was that I had to use stuff that I already had, no buying in anything else. So while there are camera bodies more suited to shooting wildlife, that have better autofocus and higher frame rates, I stuck with my Canon EOS 30. Lens-wise, my Sigma 150-600 was the obvious choice. Now, back in the 1990s and early 2000s, there were a lot of high-speed film emulsions on the market. Kodak had Ektar 1000 in colour negative, Ektachrome 400 slide film which could be pushed to 1600 ISO, and T-Max Delta P3200 in black and white. Ilford had its Delta 3200 black and white emulsion. Fuji had Fujicolor 1600 colour negative film, Fujichrome Provia 1600, which is a colour reversal film, and Neopan 1600 professional black and white film. Now, in 2024, the situation is very different. There are no E6 films, only 2 colour negative films, but they are 800 ISO, and 2 black and white emulsions nominally rated at 3200. So for this project, I chose Kodak Portra 800 colour negative film and Ilford Delta 3200 for black and white. The elephant in the room is the cost of film and developing, and this has got to be a major consideration. It's just not cheap to shoot film anymore. The following prices are for Australia, as this is where I live. Now, Kodak Portra 800 is $37 for a 36 exposure film. Ilford Delta is 3200 is 18 bucks. Kodak T-Max 3200 is 30. Lomo 800 can cost as much as $48 for a single roll, but multi-packs of 3 36 exposure rolls can be bought for $140. The cost of processing is $10 for colour negative and $18 for black and white. Those prices are for developing and cutting and sleeving only. Now, my Canon EOS 30 can shoot at 4 frames per second, so machine gunning birds in flight would see you get through a roll every 9 seconds at a cost of more than $1 per shot. Now, typically, when I go out in the morning for 3 hours or so, I'll shoot around 3,000 to 4,000 frames with my digital cameras. If I did the same with film, that could send me bankrupt pretty quickly. So when I decided to undertake this project, I decided that I'd only shoot a maximum of 2 rolls on an outing. Using my Canon EOS 30 meant that after finishing the film, I could just switch over the body to my Canon 80D, so I could make the most of the morning. So after a few months, what can I say? Well, the first thing that really stuck out was the grain of the film. Many photographers complain bitterly about noise in their images, but that has got nothing on the grain in these fast emulsions. Funnily enough, I wasn't too bothered with it in the black and white shots on Ilford Delta 3200, as I quite like that look. I had a Tri-X 400 push-to stops developed in Rodinal phase many years ago, which might explain that foible. The shots taken on Kodak Portra 800 were a little bit different. I suppose I'd just become used to noise-free images up to 1600 ISO on my digital cameras. Having said that now, I've got used to it and I quite like the results. Digitizing the negatives was an interesting experience. To keep the costs down, I scanned the images myself using a DSLR and a macro lens. The learning curve has been a little bit on the steep side, especially for colour negatives, and I'm still not sure whether I'm happy with the results or not. If I were to continue with this, and I think at this stage I will, I'll probably get a dedicated film scanner. The reason being that while scanning using a camera was quite quick for the actual process itself, I took about half an hour for a roll of 36 of exposures, it was the faffing around in Lightroom and Photoshop later that took a lot more time. Was I happy with the final results? Yes, I was. I also think that it's a very interesting exercise because it really makes you think. Firstly, which film stock to use? The Ilford Delta 3200 is great for low light and misty atmospheric conditions. It's not a film to use if getting the maximum feather detail is your priority. The Kodak Portra 800 is best suited to brighter conditions with nice light. When shooting digital, I use shutter priority and an auto ISO, which means that I can just concentrate on the composition. With film, the ISO is not a variable. Once you've loaded the film and start using it at that ISO, you're committed to it for the whole roll. The net result is that I have to be very aware of what my exposure is all the time. This isn't a bad thing, as it makes me more engaged with the whole picture taking process. Were there any downsides besides the expense? Yes, there were. I found that using film made me be a lot more conservative in my photos. I was not so inclined to experiment. For instance, shooting birds in flight, I'd only take 2 or 3 frames, whereas when shooting digitally, I'd think nothing of taking 20 or 30 frames, as I'd want to be able to choose getting the wings in the perfect position. I've just become accustomed also to subject tracking and have become quite reliant on it. Going back to an autofocus system developed in the 1990s was a bit of a shock. It wasn't as positive or sticky, which meant there were a lot of out of focus pictures. I also missed having a histogram in my viewfinder and the lack of instant feedback on the LCD screen. This meant I had to remember how much exposure compensation I needed to give, for instance, for saying a black bird on a very dark background. But you don't have that visual cue of what's happening in the EVF to remind you. Or a backlit white egret, having to get the exposure compensation for that. Having to wait a couple of weeks for the films to come back from the lab was also a lesson in deferred gratification. Would I give up digital and convert solely to film? No, I don't see it as a binary choice. In many ways, digital is a better medium for wildlife photography. It gives you a lot more freedom. You can shoot in incredibly low light and you don't have the feeling the meter is running as you take photos. Film does have its place, though, as a creative alternative. If you're after a specific look or mood, then it is ideal. So overall, I greatly enjoyed the whole project, doing the whole project, and as I said, I'm likely to continue with it for the time being. I hope you found this enjoyable and informative, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Goodbye.